I appreciate everybody being here, being engaged, being interested in the goings on of the college and the division. I want to thank everybody for all the work that you've done to transition to distance-based education, meeting the needs of our students, recruiting new students for our new classes. It's just been an awful lot to deal with when we're doing it from our homes and not being able to work closely with our colleagues and still getting everything done. So I really, really appreciate all the effort of everybody pulling together to make this happen, and keep our outstanding programs moving forward. I really, I don't have anything specifically prepared. I assume that people would want to hear a little bit about budget. So I can talk about budget and I can talk about reorganization. I would imagine that those are two of the top issues, but we can cover anything that people are interested in talking about. I'm going to try to not talk about, very specific kinds of things in terms of budget cuts and those kinds of things, because we're still in the proposal stage, but we can talk about, I guess, what's on the table. When I talked with the College of Pharmacy, and I really went around to all the different academic units in the fall, and we were sort of prepping for some of the budget cuts that we knew were coming because of decreased enrollment, and state requested either rescission of current year budget, and also prepping for what was at the time a 2% rescission or budget cut for next year. We've now been asked for 5%, 5 additional percent from the state. All state agencies have been asked for this return, or not return, but a reduction in budget for fiscal year 21, the one that starts about the 1st of July. And this is really a result of the drastic and rapid economic downturn that occurs with the coronavirus, and a decrease in sales tax receipts as well as income tax because of unemployment and otherwise. So the State Department of Financial Management and the State Department of Human Resources have teamed up and asked us for that amount of budget reduction. And so all of the different academic units and non-academic units on campus have all been going through what the president and Glenn Nelson, our vice president for finance and business affairs, have asked for. And that's an exercise where we look at a 4%, 5%, and 6% budget reduction on top of the budgets that were just created, that really were about a 2% reduction. The other thing from current year, the other thing that has happened very acutely is that the governor and the state have asked for a 1% return, an additional 1% this year. So we also are having to find a 1% rescission in the state budget, or the ISU budget that comes from the state here in the last 3 months of the fiscal year, which is really kind of difficult, right? Because it's based upon the entire year's budget, and we have to then find 1% in a quarter, which in essence is almost like a 4% cut of what the remaining budget is. So that's another exercise that we're going through. The university, as you know, does have some reserves. And so as we work through this process, it's anticipated that not only will we be looking at cuts, we will be looking at using perhaps more of our reserves, and we will be looking for ways to grow revenue. And I think, as we go through these exercises, we really get bogged down in how are we going to cut to meet this need. And certainly cuts come right off the bottom line. Growth sometimes comes with costs. And so growth is a little, from a financial perspective, sometimes it's harder to achieve. But I can tell you that in the Division of Health Sciences, we do have the opportunity for some growth. And in some of our programs, we are growing, and we can guarantee that growth because we've got increased admissions and students, readily in the pipeline. So when we look at the overall divisional budget, it does include some revenue increases. So the process that we're going to follow from here is next week we will be having leadership council meetings. That's the deans, most of the different unit directors in the university. And we will be presenting those budget proposals with the 4%, 5%, and 6% cuts. We will then talk through that. We don't have guidance as to whether we're going to use 4% or 6% yet. We don't have guidance as to whether we're going to have everybody have the same amount of cut. It's my hope that we're more strategic than that, to be perfectly honest, as we move forward, because some cuts will hurt more in some units than in others. And so that's part of the discussion that's going to occur next week over several hours of meetings with the Leadership Council. And then I'm not actually sure on the timeline after that. Once we pull together those numbers, the Office of Finance and Business Affairs will, I think, collate all that and put it into a proposal from the university to the state, and then that will have to be approved for our budget to then move forward. But I don't exactly know the timeline after next week. I'm going to pause there, and maybe we can have questions about budget. As I said, there are specifics that I may not be able to answer, but if there are questions that I can't answer, I certainly can get back to people either one-on-one or to a larger group to answer those questions that I may not have answers for yet. But I'm happy to try to field whatever you might have in terms of questions, and Ginny can feed me questions that come through the chat, either open or anonymously.
Okay. Our first question is, has anything come of the cost reduction ideas solicited from faculty and staff?
So that's a great question. And in fact, as we went through this budget reduction exercise, those were all redistributed to the different units. And in the division, we had, 20 or 30 of those suggestions that had come through. And it was a variety of different things. Some of them were specific to individual academic units. Some of them were more division-wide, related to travel expenses, for example, which all of the units could potentially look at their travel expenses. And so the answer to that question is yes, those were re-examined during this more recent budget setting process, and many of those suggestions, I think, were incorporated into the budget plans. Not all, but many of them, and all of them were considered because we had those sitting right in front of us as we went through this exercise. Other questions? Okay, well, it was nice talking with all of you. No, I definitely have some other things I can talk about too, though.
I've got one for you too, Rex.
Okay, go ahead, Ginny.
Is there any new information on early retirement? Oh,
that's a good question. So many of you have probably heard about early retirement options. There was a plan that was utilized by the University of Idaho during this fiscal year. University of Idaho has had very significant budget issues to deal with in the range of $20 million in cuts that they needed to make even before the coronavirus issue hit us. And the University of Idaho did float a plan to encourage retirement, not necessarily early retirement, but to encourage retirement. And that plan, if I remember right, was for folks that were 55 and older and had, it was either 10 or 20 years of service at the institution, that they could opt for retirement, and they would be paid 1/3 of their salary for 3 years as an incentive to leave the University of Idaho. There are other plans that have been utilized by other institutions around the country, and ISU is looking at those. It's interesting, the U of I doesn't have to follow the same human resources policies that the other institutions do, and that's partly a legacy of their land grant status and how they were established in legislative code. So they don't have the same HR policies that we do, or BSU or Lewis Clark State College or the community colleges have. So there are some issues related to HR policies that affect us that didn't affect them. So as we're putting together a plan, it then has to be approved by the Department of Human Resources at the state. And there are some legal issues, both state and federal, as I understand it, about these plans that have to be incorporated, that again, U of I may not have had to follow, although they would have had to follow the federal rules. And so we're in the process of putting together a plan and trying to determine, how many people might qualify based upon a variety of different criteria. So some data have been pulled together in terms of time in service and age of employees to see just how many might fit into a plan like the one that I outlined, although our plan may not end up looking just like that. And that's being evaluated. So I would say that it's being evaluated internal to ISU. It was discussed at our last administrative council meeting with the president. And if a plan is developed locally at ISU, that would then be subject to some approvals at the state. So it's being considered. It would be something sort of like what I just outlined, and yet there are still several hurdles to overcome before that that might be implemented.
Okay, Rex, we have a few more questions.
Okay.
The next one is, do any of the levels of budget cuts you're looking at cut people and/or programs in pharmacy?
And Walter can chime in here, because Walter and his team locally at the College of Pharmacy have put together their budget. We are really working very hard division-wide to not cut people. And I would say that the vast majority of our budget savings are going to be from things like open positions, not filling open positions, and looking at other expenditures. Some of that does include adjunct contracts or overload pay. It would include travel. It would include operational expenditures and those kinds of things. But our goal is to cut as few people as possible, and literally to try to not cut anybody from those positions. There are all kinds of issues that come into play in terms of cutting individuals from positions, whether they're classified staff, non-classified staff, or faculty of a variety of different types of faculty. And so we're working very hard to not be dealing with the issues related to cutting people in their positions. I would say that those kinds of conversations are on the table, but we are absolutely trying to achieve it without having to do that. And Walter, I don't know if you want to chime in specifically on the College of Pharmacy's budget proposal.
Thanks, Rex. Where we are right now is that, as I've shared with the faculty and the staff, is that at the 4%, 5%, and 6% plans that we have submitted, we are not having to send any letters where we are releasing our professional non-classified staff. We have no intention of sending any one-year notices to faculty or anything of that nature. So right now, we have been able to use our vacant lines. Now, we have given up a line and it was a line that had been open since 2015. And one of the things I was thinking about as Rex was talking that I don't think I have shared with the faculty and staff, and it really it was imprinted in my mind when I heard it, was Glenn Nelson made the comment that it is a lot easier to remove vacant positions than it is real people. And it really stuck in my mind. And I think that's been the focus that I've had as dean, is to wherever we can jettison a vacant line to avoid a real person having to be released. That's what we've done. And at this point in time, there's no releasing of lines in the College of Pharmacy that are currently filled. As to programs, if you break down our programs into the departments and then the MSCP program and the graduate programs, then those programs all remain intact. There is no cutting of any program in the College of Pharmacy. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. I will say that there are going to be some very difficult decisions made in the rest of the university. There are programs that are struggling significantly, whether it's graduate degrees or undergraduate degrees in other areas of the university, that there may be some very, very difficult conversations coming. But even if we eliminated a program, that would have to be a multi-year process. And to be able to teach students out and to be able to give faculty the appropriate notifications, it would be a multi-year process for that to occur. We don't expect any of that to occur in the Division of Health Sciences, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, Rex and Walter, would early retirements include only faculty or staff as well?
My understanding of that is it needs to, we develop criteria, and it needs to be available for all employees that meet the criteria. So if there's an age and time in service criterion, then it would include staff as well as faculty. That's my understanding of the way the laws are around this.
Okay, next question. Are there any discussions between the universities to potentially share cost of resources, such as library, like California and New York systems? Are there any plans to combine academic programs across universities in the state?
So that's a really good question. There are some conversations around that, and the State Board of Education a couple of years ago had a consultant come in and look at a variety of functions in the state university system and to see what could be potentially consolidated. There are things like library. That's a great example. There are things like the state purchasing system. There are things like the use of general counsel and having legal support. And then there are the ideas of combining or at least sharing resources with programs. We're in active conversations with Boise State, for example, in looking at ways to potentially share faculty and resources and grow degree opportunities in public health. That's an example in the division where we are having some of those conversations. So the answer is yes. There are those opportunities, and they're being explored on, I guess, a relatively informal basis from a programmatic perspective, but in a more aggressive and proactive way for things like these, what they call back office functions in the institutions, things like the purchasing or even library resources and that kind of thing. So yes, those are being actively discussed.
Okay, next question. Are there any further estimates of the probability of statewide cuts more than 5% for next year? We know you don't have a crystal ball, but is there discussion beyond 4 to 6%?
So at this point, I haven't heard anything beyond the 4 to 6%. That being said, the longer that we have the stay-at-home order in place, the bigger the economic hit, and obviously everyone's hearing about the economic hit, and the desire to get businesses open and get people back to work. The longer that goes, I become more and more nervous about potentially being asked for additional cuts, but I haven't heard anything official. I will say that it is unlikely that, and I didn't mention this earlier, it's unlikely that we will get our CEC, or change in employee compensation. The raises that we normally get or hear about this time of year, it's unlikely that that will occur. I don't see the, and I've heard a little bit of rumor around this, I don't see the state giving us 2% and then saying you got to give it right back. The other thing is that it actually, a raise hurts us, especially in the Division of Health Sciences, because the raise only comes on appropriated dollars, and that's only about half of our budget. So as we're having to cut up to 6% out of a local account, if there are people paid on that local account, giving them a raise cuts another 2%. It makes that an 8% cut. And so in a way, given the fact that we're already having to come up with plans to give 4, 5, or 6% back, it's in some ways it's an okay thing that we're not having to give find another 2% to give people raises on top of that, because it would really affect our account balances in those local accounts. We also don't get raise money on tuition dollars. So we're literally, when we get a raise from the state, it only comes on about 25% of the money that comes from, or comes into ISU as budget. And because we're not increasing tuition, at least for in-state students, we can't fund a raise very easily there either, if that makes sense. I hope I explained myself okay.
Follow-up question, does that also apply to promotions? So if we were going to go up for promotion this summer, do we hold off or go up and anticipate the bump in salary coming later?
So to be perfectly honest with you, from an academic affairs level, that's one of the things that we are most concerned about and advocating for at the present time, and that is the promotions for people that were just promoted in either the academic, the clinical track or the tenure track. And so right now that money is frozen, and academic affairs at all of the institutions are actively advocating for that pool of money to make sure that people who are promoted from assistant to associate are going to get their promotion dollars. I think that that's about the most high priority request that the university can make. The president, the provost agree. There's going to be very, very aggressive negotiations if that looks like that money's not going to come through. But I think that it will. I think that it's too important to support our faculty for it to not come through. I don't believe that that's ever been held back in the history of the institution. And even moving towards next year, we would look to allocate the appropriate amount of money to be able to support those kinds of promotions. It's too important to the academic enterprise for us to not be able to compensate people when they're promoted through that process. So I can tell you that we will be advocating as aggressively as we possibly can for that. And to be perfectly honest, it's only about $300,000 here at ISU. It's not that much money in the grand scheme of things.
Okay. And have salary reductions been discussed % across the board?
Yeah, so salary reductions have been discussed, as have furloughs. There are institutions that are furloughing people, not here in the state yet, but that has been done before. If you recall, back in the 2008-2010 timeframe, both U of I and BSU did use furloughs, whereas ISU did not. Salary reductions, as I understand it, have to be voluntary. So we can't come to you and say, I'm taking a salary cut, you need to too. It has to truly be voluntary. And I suppose if an academic unit came together and made that offer, that's something that could be considered. But right now, a across-the-board salary reduction is not on the table. furloughs, or, you know, sort of telling people we're going to take Fridays off for a period of time or something like that without pay. That it has been discussed, but it's not in our budget models right now. And as far as I know, none of the budgets, and I do know none of the budgets from academic affairs include the furlough concept. So I don't think in this round of budget cuts that kind of thing is being considered. No additional questions right now, Ginny? Let me talk just a little bit about the reorganization. And the reorganization of the division really hasn't affected the College of Pharmacy per se to a great extent, but it has affected the division, I think, significantly. As you all know, when the division was created, a long time ago, close to 10 years ago, maybe even 11 years ago, it was always the goal to look at a college structure. And so in 2018, we were able to establish a 4-college structure that is the College of Pharmacy, College of Nursing, Rehabilitation and Communication Sciences, and Health Professions. We were able to allocate the resources to be able to at least fund the initial or inaugural deans in those different colleges. And I think really had a lot of celebration and a lot of excitement around the establishment of those colleges, particularly in nursing and in rehabilitation and communication sciences. And so when we were asked in the fall to look at ways of reorganizing to decrease administration, and when we talk about that, there's budget that goes along with that, but it really came about as a request to decrease the administrative structure within the division and within the institution. It was really a difficult process. We had made, I think, pretty good headway over the course of December and January. And then in February, we started getting a sense that there may be a bigger need for more budget cut and more administrative reductions. And we got direction that we needed to contract even further from the draft that we were working through in the division, which really was still going to have a 3-college structure. And so as this has evolved over the course of spring semester, we have now moved to a 2-college structure within the division. That includes, the College of Pharmacy, and it includes a College of Health. The College of Health will have a School of Nursing and a School of Rehabilitation and Communication Sciences, and then the other departments that have traditionally been in what we call the College of Health Professions. We have an empty dean position as the Dean of the College of Health, and we will have to realign some of the other administrative roles and people in the School of Rehabilitation and Communication Sciences and School of Nursing. But we'll be doing that over the next few months. That reorganization has created an absolutely monstrous college. And so the College of Health will become the largest college on campus in terms of numbers of students for sure, and I believe numbers of faculty as well. And it will be a lot for somebody to administer. We hope that we'll have the right kind of administrative structure in place, and obviously this will be a little bit of an experiment as we move through this. But the budget and some of the other political pressures have necessitated us getting to this point. I'm disappointed by it. I'll be perfectly honest with you. We really haven't had very much time that we've had. I think in the 4 years that I've been in this position, We've only had about 6 months of that where we've had all of those administrative positions full and been operating sort of at full capacity with people able to focus on all of the different programs in their different academic units. So it's disappointing to me that we're having to backtrack a little bit and re-identify the roles and responsibilities of the administrative team in the division. We have a lot going on. We've got a lot of opportunities, and some of those opportunities are not going to be realized because we have fewer folks in those leadership roles to help move things along. So it is disappointing to me, but it was a necessity, and really driven by the president and his desire to take advantage of the fact that we had some open positions there from an administrative perspective, and stimulate us to reorganize. We will have some budget savings, and we utilize that budget savings in this exercise that we just went through. And so, in a way, I suppose there's a small silver lining there that we had some money that we could reallocate and some money that we could offer up for the budget savings. So I don't know if there are any questions about the reorg or about other things.
We have an additional question, too, actually. The first one is, wouldn't furloughs be better for the fact that they are temporary and fairly distributed across all levels? It might be worth exploring, but with a cutoff level for those employees who make the lowest salaries and would be hurt most going without pay, this might be better than not filling positions that are badly needed.
So, that's the great debate. And Walter quoted Glenn Nelson earlier, it's much easier to ask people, much easier to not fill positions than ask people to either not come back to work or be furloughed. And furloughs do hurt certainly those people that make lower salaries. We have lots of people on this campus that make very low salaries, and they're not just staff. There's a lot of faculty that make less than what their peers might make at other institutions. And so, I think there's a reasonable discussion that can be had around the concept that the questioner brought up in terms of furloughs and how to actually implement that in the fairest way. But there's no question that for some faculty and even some staff, a few days off over the course of the year without pay would not make as much of an economic impact. And yes, we are going to sacrifice some positions that we absolutely need and that we absolutely wanted to be able to move forward and grow our programs. So it's a very fair question. At this point, furloughs are being held back, and that's primarily being driven by the president's desires and the Office of Finance and Business Affairs desires to not directly affect any of the employees who are on campus. Now, obviously, if we lose positions, that still affects us, right? Because it's a greater workload across the rest of those of us who are still here. But the idea was to have less of a direct financial impact on employees if possible.
Back to the reorg. Are there any plans to combine College of Pharmacy and Colleges of Health in the future, renaming college, etc., like some other schools?
So some of those ideas were discussed as we moved through this process, and there are some other schools or colleges of pharmacy that have other programs in them, and that was discussed. I'll be perfectly honest. The College of Pharmacy celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. It was a difficult thing for me to think about changing the name of the college in some way or changing the structure in some fairly dramatic way in its centennial year. And the president actually shared that perspective. So at this point, there are no plans to change what we've just done, which are fairly significant for the other academic units, but obviously didn't affect the College of Pharmacy to a great extent.
Okay. Next question is the chair of PPRA a frozen position?
Walter, do you want to talk through that a little bit?
Thanks, Rex. Yes, yesterday late, I received from Brian Sagendorf a listing of our open positions and or vacant positions, and all of those positions have been frozen as of yesterday afternoon until such time as that freeze is lifted. And we are considering options for how to manage that with Kathy Oliphant as interim chair.
So I'll just add a little bit to that. The admin council has been reviewing a list of positions and personnel actions at a regular basis. We meet every 2 weeks on Monday. That list has positions that are currently in the search phase, currently in the offer stage, currently in the search phase, getting ready to put the search together. And then there's another category of sort of salary adjustments and title adjustments and other sort of personnel actions. Every one of those is currently frozen. And so what Walter was just talking about not only affects and I don't know how many positions you had on the list, Walter, and different adjustments you had, 5 positions, okay. It affects those, but it affects about 95 others on this campus. And we just sent, and the reason for that is because the state has told us that they're frozen, not because of necessarily anything that's happened here at ISU. So we just sent the first group of positions to the state on Monday for possible approval. And these were prioritized not only by the deans, but then by admin council to be able to move forward. These included positions like the chief information officer for campus. That position is currently open. The general counsel for campus, which is a really important position because we don't have any legal support on campus right now, other than some sort of PRN or as needed support that we have, or asking Walter for his legal expertise occasionally. So there are some positions like those that are very high priority. There are some very strategic faculty positions in different areas of the university that were prioritized. We sent a list on Monday of about 30 of those. And I just talked to Brian Sagendorf today, the director of HR, and we basically got our hands slapped because we sent so many to the Department of Human Resources. We had about 8 of those come back as approved. And those were ones that we justified from, and I'm talking about the entire university now. Those were positions that were needed because of accreditation standards needing to be met or other things where it would have really impacted the institution or the program. I even have positions in the division where we have offers out and have negotiated counter offers that are currently now being held. So we literally have made offers to individuals, they've countered, we've gone back, and now the Department of Human Resources is preventing us from locking them up and putting the final offer onto paper and signing on the dotted line. So it's very frustrating right now with that process. And to be perfectly honest, it's been a very, very difficult and disappointing decision-making process to try to come up with those positions that we can even send to the state to meet the needs of the programs. And obviously, when you make decisions like that, people are going to be disappointed about which positions move forward and which ones don't. But it's really, as far as my experience and even my memory before being in an administrative role, this is the worst that it's ever been in terms of getting positions approved and making offers.
Follow-up question to that,
Yeah.
Rex. If legal might become a combined state level position, why would we ask to fill that position?
Well, because we literally have like 3 vacancies in the Office of General Counsel. We're only looking at filling 1 at the present time. the level of support that we can currently get, and the Division of Health Science is a great example. We can't get the kind of healthcare related law support that we had when we were working with James Francel here. So we've talked with BSU, we've talked with U of I. They don't have general counsel or legal support to be able to help us. We've had questions out of clinic, questions related to healthcare billing, those kinds of things where we can't get answers, and we've had to go out and then pay a consultant or a legal firm to be able to help us with that kind of consulting. So even though we're looking at combining some of those functions across the institutions, it doesn't mean that there won't be necessarily certain types of legal expertise on some of the campus. And the president has decided that even though we're looking at exploring how we might consolidate those offices, having at least some presence on campus is desirable. That's the best answer I have for that. It's a reasonable question.
Okay. How did Idaho State end up in this position, especially when we went through such dramatic cuts under Valus?
Well, COVID-19 is a big reason. The other things that I think have happened, and this is to some extent speculation, but being involved in some of these conversations, obviously our enrollment overall at the university is in a decline. And the university has not right-sized, that's the term that keeps getting used, from that declining enrollment. And several years ago, we had 12 or 13,000 students on this campus, and we're sitting at about 10,000 students right now. There are just a lot of factors, including a good economy where people have not gone to college, that have affected our enrollment. It's interesting because when you look at the numbers of applications, completed financial aid applications, and interest in ISU, that has gone up dramatically, probably in response at least partly to the statewide marketing campaign that has been initiated by ISU. And so we were very, very optimistic about the numbers of students that have been applying, that have been filling out scholarship applications and being a part of that whole application process this spring. But now some of that is thrown into another unknown with COVID. And whether or not those students will actually come in the fall is an open question. I will tell you that the number of registrations that have been occurring, the number of withdrawals this spring, all of those are either up on the positive things, that is registrations for fall, and either flat or no real change for the withdrawals this spring. So that's good that we're seeing those trends, but we really don't know how many students are really going to show up in the fall, and we don't know exactly how we're going to be delivering our curricula. So the other factor that I will talk a little bit about is the dual credit and advanced placement credits that students are coming to ISU with has dramatically affected the number of sections and the number of courses that are needed, particularly in the general ed curriculum. So there are a lot of students that will come with 3 or 6 or even more English and communication credits and not necessarily have to take those courses. I don't know the exact numbers, but the numbers of sections of English 101, and maybe that's not the right number, maybe it's English 110, I'm not sure, but basically freshman English has decreased threefold on this campus because so many students are taking either dual credit or advanced placement courses that they don't end up needing to take much English. That's the case also in math and in speech and in many other of the general ed requirements. And we've got to get to the point where we have responded to that market force with an appropriate right sizing of other areas of campus.
Okay. Rex, is there any work being done at the university level looking at the efficiency of support systems like ETS, purchasing, travel, etc. Time, effort equals money, and if it takes excess time to work with those systems, that's effort taken away from other activities that help us grow even in lean times.
Yeah, there's no question there are a ton of inefficiencies out there in many of those workflows and processes. And I think Kevin has been very focused on those kinds of things, the chargebacks that occur where, we have to pay for telecom, or we have to pay for somebody to come in and paint, or we have to pay for, IT services, whatever the case may be. So the answer is yes, absolutely. Now, I will tell you that our Office of Finance and Business Affairs has been going gangbusters on trying to create new budget models, and then being hit with the COVID crisis. They really haven't had time to be able to, and many of these functions you're asking about are in finance and business affairs, whether it's facilities, telecom, IT, all of those are in that part of the house. And so to be perfectly honest, there has not been enough time to address all of those. But I just met yesterday with Jen Steele, who's the budget officer, and there are all kinds of things on her radar to improve workflow, to improve, the shuffling of paperwork, to improve these chargebacks and other activities on campus. It just takes time to get those done. And many of those things were on that 350 suggestions that came from the faculty and staff in terms of budget solutions. You're absolutely right. There's a ton of time spent on that. We have staff on campus that spend their whole time just shuffling that paper and charging that money from one department to another all day long. And there are some definite efficiencies that could be realized there, and we're working towards those. We've unfortunately been in crisis mode since the new Vice President for Finance arrived, and the budget officer arrived even later than they did. So it's just been hard to get a handle on that sort of housekeeping stuff that could improve some of the efficiencies on campus when we've been dealing with these other crises. But it's on the radar for sure. Other questions or comments? Or I see 3 on the chat, Jenny, but there's none that we need to address, or those are ones we've already talked about.
Okay, if you're seeing ones that you haven't answered yet, definitely.
Oh, I'm just seeing the number 3. I don't know if there are actual. Oh, they're from you that say no additional questions. Okay.
Yeah, those are for me. And then we have one other question here that just came in. There are specific rules that student fee money can be used for. Any comments about pharmacy student fees, professional fees?
So it's a good question, and one that's frankly concerning to me as well. The way the health professions have been able to grow to some extent is through the use of professional fees. We've been very, very conscious of increasing those professional fees only as much to support the raises, the change in employee compensation that comes through for folks that are supported on those fees, and then other technological or facility related kinds of increases. So we've been, I think, very judicious in how we've utilized those fees, and across the division, our programs are affordable compared to our peers. And in fact, in many cases, the lowest in the region amongst our peers for a lot of our different programs. So you're right, the way that those fees were originally set up by the state board, and there's a policy, I think it's 5R, because we've been talking about this a little bit, that basically says those fees have to stay within the program to support that program. In times of financial crisis, what ends up happening is people start turning over rocks and looking for where all the money is on campus. And the reality is there's a lot of reserve in local accounts. Those are like checking accounts that hold professional fees, course fees, EISU fees, lots of places like that on this campus. And in fact, it's over $10 million in the division alone. What people need to realize is that's really one-time money if it's going to get spent. And so it's not dipping into those reserves with ongoing expenses is not sustainable. And so I want to vigorously protect those, because we get all kinds of expenses that come up all the time in the Division of Health Sciences. And we have programs in the division that are funded entirely off professional fees. And we have programs in the division that have no professional fees and are funded entirely off the tuition dollars, appropriated money that come to the program. So we literally have both ends of that spectrum in the Division of Health Sciences. Overall, about 47%, if I remember my numbers right, of our budget is on local accounts, and that's either clinic revenue, and grants are a piece of another piece of the budget. But when it comes to local money, it's about 45 to 47% across the division, and that's professional fees and clinical revenue. And so it's very important in my mind that that money stay within those programs, even though there are some reserves there. Most of our units are spending into those reserves. The College of Pharmacy is one of those entities that is spending some of its reserves slowly, but it's not sustainable in the long term. And we don't want to see any change there. I will tell you that because there's some money sitting there, there are those on campus who turn over those rocks and identify where those funds are. And there is, I think, some risk that that those reserves, even though they're allocated to those departments, if the board were to make a change in the policy, could potentially be pulled away from those academic units. I'll just be honest with you. I think that's a risk. It's not something I want to see.
This is the last question that I see on my end. Do you have any information about the dean of the new college?
So we have not begun any process related to the dean of the new college. As many of you may know, we had searches actively moving forward for the dean of the College of Health Professions and the dean of Circus, Communication and Rehabilitation Sciences. And those searches were put on hold. I think it was back in November. We haven't started any of the paperwork for the Dean of Health. And I'm a little worried, given the freeze that we're dealing with, that it may be challenging for us to get that search off the ground, but we'll be starting to push forward with filling that position here in the next few weeks.
That's all I have for you, Rex.
Okay. Well, we are 2 minutes short of 5 o'clock, but I'm happy to do this again. Obviously, not seeing each other on campus, not having regular face-to-face meetings, it's difficult to keep everybody informed. So I'm glad that you all were able to join today. I'm happy to answer questions if people want to shoot me an email. If you want to get on a phone call or a Zoom call, there's a lot of uncertainty, but I want you to know that we're all working really hard to protect everybody's job. We know that we're a lean operation. There's not a lot of waste in the Division of Health Sciences. It was very, very difficult making the cuts that we've made. It's going to affect us for a considerable amount of time. We are fortunate in the division that we do have a few options that other academic programs don't have in terms of revenue and professional fees, our clinical revenue, even grants. There are some opportunities that we have in the health sciences that aren't available to others, and we're going to get through this. But it's going to hurt a little bit, and I know that it causes a lot of stress on top of being in isolation. If you have kids at home doing homeschooling, there's a lot of stressors right now that we all haven't had to deal with very much. And I just want to thank you all for hanging in there and being a part of this team, because it's going to take all of us to push through and to then begin to climb out on the other side.
And then Rex, do we want to talk about a reminder for the town hall meetings for KDHS tomorrow and next week?
Sure. I'm sure that most of these folks have probably heard enough from me, but we do have some other meetings scheduled. It'll really be the same format, and it's for primarily folks that weren't able to attend today. And this one was sort of advertised as a meeting with pharmacy, but we also sent out an announcement to the whole division if people wanted to join. We have one at 10:30 on Friday. So if there are colleagues that couldn't attend today but might have an interest in doing that, 10:30 on Friday, we'll be Zooming again. These announcements, Ginny, there's a web page that has these at Marcom, right? Can you just tell us where that is?
So it's isu.edu/townhall, and I'll put this in the chats as well. And then the last thing that you'll hear from me is that this session was recorded, and all of the sessions, all of the town halls across campus will be recorded and put on this same page. So if you miss any one town hall that you would like to attend, you can go back and find the recording here. We'll have it on our YouTube account.
Yeah, I will tell people that the other town halls aren't really going to have a different format per se, or a different content, but obviously that's driven by the questions that we get to. And I thought we had another one, and I'm not seeing it on my calendar right now.
Yes.
Oh, here it is. It's on Thursday, the 23rd at 3:30, right? So anyway, thanks everybody for being here, and thanks again for hanging in under tough circumstances, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Rex.
You bet. Take care, everybody.